You have to understand this first. The craziest vow any woman in uniform ever made was about to come true. She stood right there and said she would marry the first guy who could fix that damned rifle. No strings attached. This stunning, blonde officer threw down the gauntlet, and, just like always, everyone ignored her. Then, one guy crawled out of the shadows. That guy was me. I hadn't been in the fight long, but my reputation was that of a top-tier special forces operator. More craziness was coming, and here is your spoiler. I absolutely married that blonde, and you had better believe she ended up pregnant. But that was still a long way off. The sky above Fort Independence was a perfect, clear blue, a total lie for the chaos that lay below it. Sprawled beneath that deceptive calm, Patriot Air Force Base, covering an area of 12 square miles, looked like a massive steel fortress. The jagged peaks of the Cascade Mountains stabbed the sky like bony ribs, surrounding the base, and at an elevation nearing 9,500 feet, the air was clean but cold enough to freeze your lungs. The only thing that broke the immense silence was the dull boom of artillery from the endless training ranges and the occasional crack of a rifle shot. I was standing in the Central Armory Annex, the most heavily guarded zone on the entire base. Ashley Calloway, the officer in charge of this whole operation, was slowly, almost lovingly, stroking the cold rifle barrel with her long, delicate fingers, illuminated only by the harsh fluorescent light overhead. Resting on the workbench before her was an old, heavily rusted assault rifle. But this was no ordinary rifle, you need to grasp that. This piece was forged 65 years ago by a legendary gunsmith. The barrel was hammered out of Damascus steel, and it had a meticulously engraved tiger leaping through clouds, so detailed you would swear the beast was about to spring to life. The stock was carved from a piece of 300-year-old walnut, which time had polished to a deep, rich, chestnut color. Before it was a weapon, it was a work of art. And for Ashley, it was a sacred relic, holding the spirit of her grandfather, the combat legend, General Frank Calloway. Right then, that spirit was deep asleep. Red rust, like a cancer, had spread all over the barrel. The beautiful, inlaid details had lost all their luster and had peeled away in spots. The wooden stock was warped and miserably cracked by moisture. But the worst problem, the killer, was that its ridiculously complex internal mechanism had completely seized up. For 5 long months, Ashley had gathered the best armorers on the base and scoured the technical ranks across the entire United States Armed Forces to try and fix it. The result was a pathetic failure. The rifle, which they called the tear of the wind, remained stubbornly silent, like a grumpy old man refusing any help. Still messing with that junk, Officer Calloway? The voice boomed through the armory like thunder. It was Colonel Rex, the Bear, Morgan, the base commander. He had a thick build, a bulldog face, and a smug smirk playing across it. He approached Ashley, his arms crossed over his chest. Behind him, other officers and warrants watched the scene with a mix of curiosity and open mockery. This was a man's world, pure and simple, and even though Ashley had earned her rank through skill, her beautiful blonde hair and blue eyes often served as a bias that overshadowed her true competence. Morgan raised his voice deliberately so everyone could hear. I hear that was your grandfather's favorite weapon. That great war hero. I bet he would crawl out of his grave if he saw you clutching this piece of trash and calling it a family treasure. I would happily toss this garbage into the incinerator right now and feel better for it. This is not garbage, Colonel. Ashley's voice was low, but cold as ice. The fire of pure anger was burning in her blue eyes. This rifle is an artifact of history. It may look like just a piece of rusted metal to you. Historical artifact? A history of failure, I would say. You could not even fix it, could you? I guess the Calloway reputation ends right here. A few quiet chuckles rippled through the onlookers at Morgan's remark. In that instant, something snapped inside Ashley. Her pride, her deep respect for her grandfather, and a seething fury at being looked down upon simply because she was a woman, all of it mixed together. Words she never intended to say flew out of her mouth. She quickly grabbed the tear of the wind and slammed it down onto the workbench with a sharp clang. Every pair of eyes in the armory zeroed in on her. The laughter stopped, and a suffocating silence fell over the room. "Very well, Colonel," Ashley declared. She met the gaze of every single person there, one by one. Her voice was crystal clear and absolutely resolute. "I swear before all of you, right here. Whoever can completely restore this tear of the wind to its original condition, regardless of their rank or age, I will happily marry that man." It was a bomb. The air in the armory froze solid. The officers just stared at each other, mouths agape, shocked beyond belief. Even Morgan stopped sneering and narrowed his eyes. He instantly realized that her declaration was not just an angry outburst but a binding oath that put her honor and her entire future on the line. After a few silent seconds, murmurs spread like a wave. "She is insane. That gun is impossible. She only said that because she doesn't want to get married." No one stepped forward casually. Nobody wanted to stake their career on that old, seemingly cursed hunk of metal. And that was the exact moment when, from the shadows behind a towering stack of ammunition crates in the corner of the armory, one lone guy quietly walked out. He was a janitor, assigned to the maintenance pool right there on the base. His coveralls were always soaked with grease, his baseball cap pulled low, and he just went about his work in silence, fading out like a ghost as soon as he was done. Most people could not even recall his name. His name was Jackson Carter. Jax Carter. Every eye in that armory swung to him. He was looking only at the tear of the wind resting on the workbench, not at Colonel Morgan or Officer Calloway. I saw his shadow beneath the brim of his hat tremble just a little bit. My heart literally dropped to the floor. It had to be that rifle. It was the same one I handled until I was sick of it, back in my grandfather's secret workshop when I was just a kid. It held his warmth and his soul. My grandfather called that gun his greatest masterpiece and his greatest tragedy. How did that rifle, after 65 years, end up abandoned right here on an American military base? A whole life flashed before my eyes, like a panorama. I had been the best sniper and an officer in the U.S. Army Delta Force. I lost everything because of a betrayal by my own team, stripped of my honor, and I ran away, crossing the ocean to America to live completely under the radar. For the last few years, I tried to forget it all, living life as a regular janitor. But fate, as if laughing at me, had shoved my past, my entire roots, right in front of me in the form of the tear of the wind. Jack slowly walked toward Ashley. The only sound in that armory was the heavy echo of his footsteps. "May I be permitted to try?" His voice was low, but the weight behind it was something nobody there could casually ignore. Colonel Morgan stepped in front of him, his face dripping with contempt. "Where do you think you are going, trash? What do you think you are going to touch with those hands that just minutes ago were holding a mop handle?" But Jax's gaze cut right past the colonel and went straight to Ashley. There was no simple curiosity or foolish recklessness in his eyes. There was a deep sorrow, like seeing a lost family member for the first time in years. There was a tenderness, like addressing an old lover. And there was a firm, absolute resolve that he would take it back. The moment she met his gaze, Ashley actually gasped. Those were not the eyes of an ordinary janitor. She made her decision, staking everything on her gut feeling. "Yes," she said. She pushed Colonel Morgan's arm aside and stepped up to Jax. "I am giving you 1 whole week. I will personally ensure you have all the tools and space you need." Everyone was stunned, but Ashley did not hesitate anymore. She decided to entrust her own destiny, and her grandfather's priceless legacy, to the hands of a nameless cleaner. And so began the most unbelievable week in the history of Patriot Air Force Base, in the most neglected warehouse, under the weight of everyone's mockery and suspicion. The space given to Jax was a derelict storage building, Warehouse 333, sitting on the base's outskirts. It had not seen any foot traffic in a long time. The air in the place was thick, hitting your nose with a musty mix of dust, grime, and rusted metal. A single, old incandescent bulb hanging from the ceiling barely managed to push back the darkness, and under its faint light, a massive workbench sat like an island. On top of it, the tear of the wind rested like a dead body. Separated from all the noise of the world, that space was perfect for Jax. He locked the warehouse door from the inside, carefully took off his work jacket and hung it up, and opened his own toolbox. The tools he took out were not standard military issue. They were old, well-used implements that felt completely natural in his hands, passed down to him by his grandfather. A small hammer, a chisel, dozens of screwdrivers and tweezers of different sizes, and glass vials containing mysterious, clear liquids. They were, quite literally, an extension of his own hands. He did not rush. Like an experienced physician examining a seriously ill patient, he spent several hours doing nothing but observing the rifle. He ran his fingertips over the barrel, gauging the depth of the rust. He used a magnifier to study the warped grain of the stock. He listened to the gun. He was absorbing the silent scream of the rifle, feeling where it hurt the most, and understanding the indignity it suffered over the last 65 years. Once the observation was complete, his hands finally began to move. There was no hesitation or wasted motion. It was a mechanical precision mixed with an artistic grace, a touch that only a master craftsman, seasoned over years, could display. He soaked a cloth in a special solution he had personally mixed and began carefully wiping the rusted areas. It was not a harsh chemical, it was his grandfather's secret formula, designed to separate only the rust while minimizing damage to the metal underneath. With a faint hiss, the red corrosion dissolved like liquid, and beneath it, the faint, shimmering wave pattern of the Damascus steel slowly began to emerge. Ashley came to the warehouse every afternoon, right on time. At first, it was just a duty, a responsibility as the officer in charge. But as the days passed, she became completely fascinated. What she was watching was not the clumsy work of a cleaner. It was closer to divine skill. Jax worked without a single blueprint, disassembling the complex mechanism one part at a time, as if he were reading his own palm. He custom-made a thin steel pick, slipped it into a gap, and gave it a light twist. A stuck pin that no other expert could remove shot out with a quiet tink. Ashley could not stop a small gasp from escaping her lips. She began observing everything about Jax. The hands she thought were only strong from pushing a mop and broom handled steel like a vice but were as delicate as silk. His back was always straight, and his eyes never missed a flicker of movement around him. The paths he took around the workbench were minimal, maximizing efficiency, the movements of a man trained to survive on a battlefield. He was not a janitor. He was a highly trained soldier, perfectly disguised. On the fourth day, the uninvited guest she expected finally showed up. Colonel Morgan brought a few subordinates with him, and he dramatically threw open the warehouse door. His arms were crossed, and his face showed blatant displeasure as he looked at the tear of the wind, which was clearly returning to its original glory. "Not bad, cleaner. You look quite professional now. I do not know where you picked up those skills, but..." Morgan barged toward Jax's workbench and reached out to grab the almost fully restored barrel. It happened in an instant. "Do not touch that." Jax, who had been completely immersed in his work, raised his head for the first time. His voice was still low, but it held the icy chill of a perpetual snowfield. His eyes were no longer those of an innocent cleaner. They were a sharp warning, a visible threat aimed at an enemy invading his territory. Morgan involuntarily pulled his hand back, staggering slightly. Shaken by the pure intensity coming from a mere janitor, he tried to cover his shock with a vicious insult. "Humph, getting pretty full of yourself, are you? Just because you are decent with a rifle, you think you are the Queen's favorite? I hear you were in Delta Force in Japan. Guess the Special Forces can make babies, too, huh?" It was a clear personal attack, an insult against both men and Ashley. Morgan wanted those words to make Jax lose his cool and snap. But Jax simply sank back into his silence. He seemed to feel that Morgan was no longer worth his attention, and he returned to his work. His calmness infuriated Morgan even more. The one who did get angry was Ashley. "Stop that, Colonel. This is my area of responsibility. You and your men need to vacate this space immediately." Her voice was an absolute command. Colonel Morgan's face twisted in fury, but he just scowled and then stormed out of the warehouse with his subordinates trailing him. After he left, an awkward silence settled in. Ashley cautiously walked up to me and asked, "Are you all right?" I paused for a long moment, just staring back at her. "Do not worry about it," was my short answer. But in those few words, I knew she saw a flash of the deep wound I was carrying. That night, Ashley could not sleep in her office. Who exactly was Jackson Carter? What did Colonel Morgan know about me? And why was this rifle, this piece of her family history, so tangled up with my own destiny? She finally made up her mind. The key to this entire mystery had to be hidden in her grandfather's past. She immediately drove the long distance to her family home and started digging through her grandfather's old footlocker, a trunk that had not been opened in decades. Inside, she found a heavy journal with a worn leather cover. Meanwhile, in the dead of night, the only steady sound in the warehouse was the rhythmic scratch of me polishing the rifle's stock. The scent of old walnut wood that drifted up as the sandpaper met the surface pulled me back to a distant past. My grandfather's workshop had always smelled like this. Even with the loud racket of steel being filed, his space had a strange sense of peace. My grandfather called a gun an instrument of balance. It should be neither too powerful nor too weak, it had to be a tool that purely expressed the will of its owner. The tear of the wind was the absolute crystallization of that philosophy. But my father, he inherited the talent but covered it with greed. He used that skill not for honor, but for money and power. He worked with shadowy figures inside the military, illegally modifying and trafficking weapons. I despised my father for it, but at the same time, I wanted to rescue him from that darkness. I joined the army and became a top operator in Delta Force just so I could understand his world and gain the power to stop him. But everything ended in the worst way possible. On the day of a secret mission that was supposed to raid a massive weapons trafficking operation, our intelligence was leaked. My team walked straight into an ambush and was almost completely wiped out. All the blame was pushed onto me, the field commander. I tried to expose the enemy inside, but instead, I was branded a traitor who was secretly working with them. My father died in a mysterious car crash right after the incident, and all the evidence pointed right back at me. I shed my uniform and fled the country, hunted by my own people. Running into the tear of the wind now was no coincidence. It was the last cry of my father and my grandfather, begging for the truth to be uncovered. It was the last chance I was ever going to get. Around the same time, Ashley was completely absorbed in her grandfather's old journal. The handwriting, written in faded ink, was strong and forceful. It detailed her grandfather's experiences as a young officer during the Cold War era, the tough joint training exercises with Allied forces and his friendships with fellow soldiers. With every page she turned, Ashley's heart pounded harder. Then, the name she was looking for finally appeared. October 15, 1968. Today, in a small town behind the front lines, I met a man. His name was Ivan Volkov. People called him the Old Russian. He could take a broken rifle and fix it like it was brand new, and the weapons he regenerated felt like they had a soul, fitting perfectly into the soldier's hands. We gave him all our unit's weapon repairs, and he never once let us down. We never shared blood, but we became brothers in steel and gunpowder. Ashley held her breath. Ivan Volkov. Jackson Carter. Different first names, but the connection was clear. The talent, the legacy. She turned the page with trembling hands. Before he returned home, Volkov gave me a rifle, which he called his best work. He named it the Tear of the Wind. He said it was fast and accurate like the wind, but it held the tears of the regretful souls who fell in battle. He left me with an ominous message: General Calloway, this rifle is not just a weapon. One day, when a great darkness threatens the honor of both our families, this will be the only key to unlock the truth. The only person who can turn that key is my own flesh and blood. If that day comes, find my grandson. He is the last hope to set everything right. Goosebumps erupted all over her body. All the pieces of the puzzle were clicking into place. Jackson Carter was the grandson of the legendary craftsman, Ivan Volkov. Her grandfather had seen all of this coming. Ashley could not hesitate any longer. Before dawn the next morning, she sprinted toward the warehouse. Jax, having worked all night, was just finishing the final polish on the perfectly restored Tear of the Wind. After 5 days of relentless work, the rifle had undergone a miracle. The barrel gleamed like black lacquer, the stock shone with a deep luster, and every component meshed with perfect, razor-sharp alignment. It was no longer some old, forgotten relic, it was a beast, awakened from a long sleep and ready to fire. Ashley stood before me, holding that worn journal. Her eyes were no longer full of suspicion or just curiosity, they were filled with awe and complete trust. "Your grandfather's name was Ivan Volkov, was it not?" I simply nodded, keeping my hands on the rifle. My silence confirmed everything she had pieced together. "My grandfather, General Frank Calloway, and yours, they were more than just friends. And this rifle is more than just a wager for a marriage. Isn't it? This is the key to uncovering the truth." I finally stopped polishing the gun and looked up at Ashley with a calm, deep stare. My eyes were saying it all, "You finally figured it out." No more words were needed between us. The bond forged between our two grandfathers, spanning half a century, was now passed down to their grandchildren. A thread of a massive conspiracy had begun to unravel right in front of us, and the Tear of the Wind shone with a cold light, signaling the start. We were no longer a challenger and the one who made the bet, an officer and a janitor. We were now the only two allies meant to face a giant fate together. The week ended, and at dawn on the final day, the heavy steel door of Warehouse 333 was opened from the inside. The air that escaped was not the smell of stale dust, but the rich, clean aroma of perfectly worked steel and quality gun oil. I stood at the door, showing no signs of having pulled an all-nighter. If anything, my eyes looked sharper than before. On the workbench behind me, the rifle rested, worthy of being called the God of the Wind, not just its tear. Ashley gasped as she walked in. What she saw was a miracle. The rust was gone without a trace, and where it had been, the mysterious wavy patterns of the Damascus steel, forged over hundreds of processes, spread out like the Milky Way across a black night sky. The inlay of the leaping tiger, once dull, now sparkled with life, ready to roar. The warped walnut stock was beautifully restored with dozens of coats of oil and polish, boasting a deep, translucent shine. It was not mere repair, it was an artistic rebirth. "It is the day of the promise," I said quietly. There was no boastfulness or anticipation in my voice, just the plain sound of a man who had completed his mission. That morning, the Central Armory Annex was packed again with every officer on the base. The rumor mill had already spun wildly. Everyone expected the failure of the unknown janitor and the humiliation of Officer Calloway. Colonel Morgan stood right up front, arms crossed, just waiting for the whole spectacle to end. Ashley and I walked into the armory together. I was carrying a long object wrapped in a black cloth. The noise and mocking silence that had filled the room instantly died. I walked straight past Colonel Morgan, meeting his gaze head-on, and placed the rifle on the central workbench. Then, I slowly pulled back the cloth, as if unveiling a holy relic. "Oh!" A low gasp escaped someone's lips. It immediately became the collective breath of the entire armory. Under the blinding lights, the Tear of the Wind radiated an overwhelming presence, like a weapon pulled straight from a legend. The officers were speechless, glued to the gun. Even a total amateur could tell, this was not just a gun. This was a piece with a soul. The arrogant smirk vanished from Colonel Morgan's face, replaced by pure shock and doubt. He involuntarily took a step forward and muttered, "Impossible. This is insane." "It has been perfectly restored, Colonel," Ashley declared, standing tall. Her voice was full of a winner's confidence. "The function is flawless. Would you like to check it?" Instead of answering, Morgan glared at me with pure hatred. He simply could not accept the fact that a mere janitor had accomplished what the entire Army's technical experts had given up on. And the fact that he had been so thoroughly fooled by Ashley Calloway, whom he despised, was a deep, burning humiliation. That evening, Ashley called me to her quarters. There was no longer any need to meet secretly in the warehouse. She poured top-shelf whiskey into 2 glasses and handed one to me. You delivered a truly unforgettable humiliation to Colonel Morgan today. Thank you. I accepted the glass silently. This is just the beginning, I said, placing the Tear of the Wind carefully on her desk without taking a sip of the whiskey. Your grandfather mentioned the word key in his journal, correct? Yes, he did. You believe this rifle is the key itself? I gently cupped the rubber buttstock of the rifle with my palm. Then, in a way no one would ever imagine, I began to press specific spots in a precise sequence. As my fingers moved smoothly, like I was playing a musical instrument, faint click-clack sounds came from inside the stock. Finally, I tapped the bottom of the stock lightly. With a quiet chink, a single steel cylinder, thinner than a hair, popped out from inside the rubber recoil pad. Ashley's eyes went wide. My grandfather was more than just a craftsman. He was brilliant at cryptography. I carefully opened the cylinder. Inside was a tiny rolled-up microfilm, no bigger than a grain of rice. Ashley quickly pulled out a military-grade reader from her drawer and magnified the film. The monitor instantly displayed a string of meaningless numbers and just one sentence. Ashley's heart hammered against her ribs. The exact phrase from her grandfather's journal, Silent Mountain. And those numbers were clearly coordinates. She immediately logged into the military map database and entered the location. The result was shocking. The coordinates pointed to Training Sector 7, the most remote area inside Patriot Air Force Base. It was a region that had been closed for decades due to the supposed risk of radiation contamination. The unofficial name for that area? Silent Mountain. Meanwhile, unable to sleep off the insult, Colonel Morgan was grilling his intelligence chief in his office. Dig up everything on Jackson Carter. Immigration records, criminal records, his history in Delta Force, everything. That man is absolutely not just a janitor. Morgan's suspicion was not just a hunch. He felt a vague memory, a shred of his own compromised past, stir whenever I was around. On his direct order, the intelligence machinery began to move. My fabricated identity was not going to last much longer. An unseen threat was closing in on us, fast. Back in Ashley's quarters, we both stared silently down at the red dot on the map. The objective was clear. But the path to it would be treacherous. Morgan had to be suspicious and watching us already. This is dangerous, I said first. You should not be involved in this. Ashley shook her head. Her blue eyes were shining with determined conviction. This is no longer your fight alone. This is about my grandfather's honor, too. We have to go. Both of us. She held out her hand to me. I hesitated for a moment, then gripped her soft hand with my own, a hand that had no grease stains, but was hardened with calluses. The alliance of 2 people carrying the fate of 2 families was sealed with that quiet resolve. Ahead of us now waited a colossal shadow known as the Silent Mountain. Since we decided to go to Silent Mountain, there was no time to waste. We had to move before Morgan's surveillance net tightened. The operation was set for 3 nights later. On the night a fierce storm was predicted for the Cascade Mountains. Bad weather would be both the perfect cover and the worst obstacle. Ashley used her authority to exploit weaknesses in the base's security system. She analyzed the camera loop cycles for Sector 7 and the guards' patrol patterns, pinpointing a window of perfect invisibility that lasted 3 minutes. I used that time to gather all the necessary gear. My backpack held mountaineering ropes, climbing gear, a silenced pistol, and the carefully disassembled Tear of the Wind. That rifle was no longer just a piece of evidence, it was now the most powerful weapon we had to protect ourselves. On the night of the promise, the sky was pitch black like spilled ink, and as predicted, a heavy wind and rain began to lash down. We breached the most vulnerable part of the base's fence and slipped into the darkness. From that moment on, we were not an officer and a civilian, but an infiltration team moving towards a single goal. My training immediately kicked in. I moved silently, like an animal born in the dark. My senses were razor-sharp, detecting the distant hum of a patrol vehicle engine and the faint scent of a human presence on the wind. Ashley stayed right on my heels, moving and hiding exactly as I signaled with my hands. She realized that the tactical knowledge she had gained from books and training was nothing more than child's play compared to the instincts of this man who had survived countless actual battles. Closed Sector 7 was a desolate wasteland. Potholed roads were cracked and collapsing, and old warning signs groaned ominously in the wind and rain. The silent mountain on the coordinates was a massive geological feature. Composed of treacherous cliffs and dense rock faces, it was a place that even professional climbers would struggle to scale. "We are here," I said, checking the GPS unit. Yet, all we could see was a giant rock wall. There was no sign of an entrance or even human passage. Just as disappointment crossed Ashley's face, I pointed to a section of the rock wall. "Look there. The rock color is slightly off." The area I pointed to was unnaturally smooth, as if carved, unlike the weathered rock around it. As we got closer, the outline of a heavy steel door, perfectly concealed in the rock face, became visible. It was a bunker entrance that had completely blended with nature over decades. The problem was the door itself. It was a smooth steel plate with no handle or keyhole, only a single, complex mechanical dial mounted right in the center. "How are we supposed to open this?" Ashley asked. Instead of answering, I pulled the firing bolt assembly from the tear of the wind out of my backpack. I carefully examined a small groove in the center of the dial. Then, I disassembled the long firing pin from the bolt. This firing pin was unlike a standard gun part. Its tip was shaped like a strange, tiny star. I fit the star-shaped tip precisely into the dial's groove. With a faint click, it meshed perfectly, like it had found its exact match. "Your grandfather was a genius," Ashley breathed, realizing that the rifle part itself was designed to act as the lock's key. I began to turn the firing pin, manipulating the dial. There were no numbers or markings. I rotated the dial subtly, listening as if by ear to the faint sounds of the internal gears clicking into place, stopping precisely, and reversing direction several times. Finally, a heavy thud echoed, and the internal lock bolt released. The heavy steel door swung inward, and a rush of cold, dry air poured out. It was not just a bunker. It was a secret intelligence storage facility built during the Cold War, unofficially known as Ghost Station. Along the hallway, endless steel shelves were packed with thousands of dust-covered document boxes, and along one wall, old reel-to-reel tape recorders and communications equipment sat silently like ghosts. This was the secret archive of our two grandfathers, a place that did not exist on any map. We rushed inside, completely driven by instinct. We headed straight for the innermost, most secret section of the bunker. In one of the safes there, we discovered a thick, old leather-bound file labeled Operation Black Vulture. Ashley's hand trembled slightly as she opened the file. Inside were the investigation records of a massive corruption network from the Cold War era, where corrupt officers from the American military had colluded to siphon off military supplies and traffic narcotics. Our grandfathers, General Frank Calloway and Ivan Volkov, had been secretly investigating this network and planning to take it down in one massive operation. Ashley swallowed hard and scanned the list of co-conspirators. Her eyes froze on one name, the ambitious young lieutenant who was the network's hub, the one who aggregated all the information and pulled the strings from behind the scenes. His name was Arthur Morgan, the current base commander. Goosebumps erupted all over my body. Everything connected perfectly. In that exact moment, we heard the faint engine sounds of multiple vehicles from outside the bunker. The noise cut through the rain and wind, growing closer. We looked at each other. Only one thought was in both our minds: Morgan had either lured us here or tracked us down. Either way, we were cornered. Ashley cursed under her breath and quickly shoved the Black Vulture file into her jacket pocket. Multiple flashlights were already stabbing through the single entrance of the bunker, their beams dancing erratically as they approached. Then came the metallic crackle of a megaphone. "We know you are inside. Officer Calloway. And Jackson Carter, or whatever your name is. Drop your weapons and surrender peacefully. There might still be room for leniency." It was Morgan's voice. But it held no hint of negotiation, only cold fury and the arrogance of a predator. Behind him, 7 fully armed military police stood ready with their automatic rifles. They were Morgan's personal loyalists, men who did not care about procedure or the law. "He is lying. He will not let us live," I whispered in the darkness. The tear of the wind was already reassembled in my arms, pointing directly at the entrance where Morgan would appear. If that file gets out, Morgan is finished. He plans to eliminate all evidence and witnesses right here. "I know," Ashley replied through gritted teeth. She pulled her own service pistol. "But fighting them head-on is suicide. They have too many men." At that moment, Morgan slowly walked into the bunker, his men behind him. He swept his flashlight over us, crouched among the piles of documents, and smiled a nasty smile. "A rather desperate position for you two, isn't it? The captain. The janitor. You crawled all the way here and opened the Pandora's box, did you?" He pointed to her pocket. "Yes, my name is in there. A very proud name, I must say. My young name." Morgan continued, speaking like an actor delivering the final lines of an old play. "Your grandfather, Calloway, and that gunsmith, Volkov, they were simply too righteous. They could not read the flow of the times. They did not understand that for a great cause, some sacrifices and dirty deals are necessary. They stood in my way." His gaze shifted directly to me. "Your father was the same way. He inherited the talent but also that idiotic sense of justice. He got too close to my operations core. I had no choice but to eliminate him." He paused. "Of course, I made sure all the evidence conveniently pointed to his son, that competent but arrogant Delta Force sniper." The confession was shocking. My father's death, my own dishonor, this man, standing right here, was behind all the tragedy. Blood rushed to my eyes. I wanted to pull the trigger immediately and put a bullet into the heart of this demon, but I gripped my sanity. Rage is a sniper's greatest enemy. "Well, have all your questions been answered?" Morgan asked arrogantly. "I will give you a moment for last words. Now, clean them up." The instant his order was given, I moved first. I did not pull the trigger on the tear of the wind. Instead, I aimed at the leg of a heavy steel shelf next to us and fired precisely. With a dull stitch, the decades-old shelf lost its footing and began to collapse, toppling the adjacent shelves like dominoes. With a ground-shaking roar, thousands of document boxes rained down, kicking up an incredible cloud of dust. In a split second, the bunker was plunged into darkness and chaos. "This way." I grabbed Ashley's wrist and dashed to the opposite wall. I had already scouted the area and headed for an old ventilation shaft. In the mountains of papers and dust, Morgan's men panicked and started firing wildly into the void. Frantic bullets ricocheted off the steel walls, flashing brief, deadly light. The shaft was barely wide enough for one person to crawl through. I pried off the cover and shoved Ashley inside first. "Go straight. The exit should be on the side of the cliff." The moment I tried to follow her, a bullet, tearing through the darkness, grazed my shoulder. Crack. I felt the ripping pain of flesh but did not utter a sound, forcing my body into the narrow passage. We frantically crawled through the dark, wet ventilation duct. Behind us, we could hear Morgan's furious shouting and their faint footsteps. Finally, we reached the end of the shaft, a small hole opening onto the cliff face. Outside, the fierce rain and wind were still raging. Dozens of feet below, a torrential stream roared through a gorge. The instant we scrambled out of the vent, Morgan and his loyalists appeared at the bunker entrance, their rifles pointed. We were completely exposed on the cliff. "That is far enough." Morgan screamed. "There is nowhere left to run." Just when I thought it was over, Ashley pulled out a small military radio from her jacket. It was not a standard troop net, it was an emergency channel that connected directly to base command and army headquarters. She launched her last desperate move, a bluff she put everything into, making sure Morgan could hear her. "This is Captain Ashley Calloway. Fort Carson situation, Black incident in progress. Base Commander Colonel Arthur Morgan is leading a mutiny, seizing a classified facility, and attempting to murder commanding personnel. I repeat. Black incident in progress. All external forces are to proceed immediately to Training Sector 7, coordinates for Silent Mountain, and suppress the rebellion. Morgan's face twisted in horror. It was an act of madness, but it was also the most terrifying move possible. Regardless of the truth, once the word mutiny was broadcast, the brass would move instantly, assuming the worst-case scenario. Shoot that crazy woman. Morgan screamed, sounding desperate. But his men hesitated for just a moment. This was no longer just a secret mission, it was clear insurrection and treason. In that brief moment of hesitation, the faint sound of multiple helicopter rotors began to cut through the distance. The sound grew louder and closer. Everyone looked up at the black, storm-lashed sky. Whose helicopters were those? Morgan's pre-called reinforcements, or the saviors answering Ashley's last cry? The fate of the two of us, isolated on that cliff, was now left to chance. In the dead blackness and the screaming wind and rain, the helicopter rotor wash grew closer, sounding like pure thunder. It was either the sound of hope or the prelude to our ruin. Morgan and his loyalists stared up, while Ashley and I held our breath, looking at the sky. Breaking through the downpour, 3 Black Hawk helicopters finally emerged in the dense fog. Their tails did not bear the Fort Carson unit markings, but an unfamiliar emblem, a lightning bolt over a star. This was a special mission unit, answerable directly to Army Central Command. Searchlights streamed from the helicopters, illuminating the entire cliff face as if it were midday. In the blinding light, Morgan's contorted face and Ashley's pale one stood in stark contrast. Drop your weapons. This is Army Central Command. The voice boomed from the helicopter's external speaker, cold and commanding, like a machine. The moment had passed, the battle was over. Morgan's men immediately dropped their rifles to the ground. Their loyalty to Morgan was real, but they were not foolish enough to take on the entire army. It is a misunderstanding. That woman is a spy. That man is an illegal alien. I was setting a trap to capture them. Morgan screamed like a madman, but his shouts were lost in the roar of the rotors and the downpour. Ropes dropped from the helicopters, and men in black combat gear rappelled down onto the cliff. Without hesitation, they subdued and handcuffed Morgan and his men. Another team came directly to where Ashley and I were. I was already fading in and out of consciousness from the blood loss in my shoulder. Ashley mustered her last bit of strength, pulled the file from her jacket, and handed it to the team commander. All the truth is inside this. Report it. With those final words, the tension released, and she too passed out. When I woke up, I was lying on a crisp white sheet in the base hospital. For fluids were slowly dripping into the vein in my arm. Outside the window, it was as if the storm had never happened. The darkness had lifted, and a calm sunlight was pouring in. The whole nightmare felt like something that only lasted a single night. Glad to see you awake, Captain Calloway. The man who opened the door to the hospital room was a general with white hair. His combat uniform was freshly pressed, and the lightning bolt emblem of the Inspector General's task force was stitched brightly onto his sleeve. His name was Major General David MacArthur. He was known in the Army as an iron-willed auditor who tolerated no compromise. What happened to Jackson Carter? Where is he? Ashley asked, her concern for me overriding worry for herself. MacArthur looked at Ashley with a brief, interested gaze. He had some blood loss from the shoulder, but his life is not in danger. He is being treated at a secure, separate location while he awaits questioning. A separate location. That confirmed it. I was not being treated as a hero, I was a key person of interest, a suspect. Colonel Morgan is denying everything, MacArthur continued. He claims that you and Jackson Carter are spies acting on orders from North Korea, and that you set him up to steal military secrets. He says the Operation Black Vulture file is a fabrication. Ashley let out a dry, exasperated laugh. We have mountains of evidence. We heard him confess everything himself. I know, MacArthur nodded, surprisingly candid. But Morgan is not just some mid-level crook. He has spent decades planting deep roots, like a political moss. There is already significant pressure coming from Washington, D.C., to bury this incident quietly. His words are the cruel reality: the truth does not always set you free, especially when it threatens to expose the colossal foundations of the organization itself. The key to this investigation lies in two places, MacArthur said, ticking them off on his fingers. First, proving that the Black Vulture file you submitted is the legitimate original, not some forgery. Second, securing the identity and ensuring the credibility of Jackson Carter. The file is definitely authentic. It has my grandfather's handwriting and signature. You must prove that. And Jackson Carter is the bigger problem. He is an undocumented alien, and he was dishonorably discharged from U.S. Army Delta Force years ago. Morgan's defense team will exploit that exact fact. Why should anyone believe the word of a man who betrayed his country? Ashley bit her lip. MacArthur was right. My past was our most powerful piece of evidence and our most fatal weakness. What do we do? She asked. We fight, the general said, his voice low but powerful. I believe the truth, Captain Calloway. But the truth does not defend itself. It is something we must fight for and win. I have no doubt your grandfather, General Frank Calloway, would have done the same. Before leaving the room, he added a cryptic warning. We have total control of Jackson Carter's custody. You will not be seeing him for a while. You need to focus on your recovery. And prepare yourself. This is no longer just a fight between you, Carter, and Morgan. This is the beginning of a massive war against the ghosts of the past. After MacArthur left, Ashley looked out the window, her jaw set with determination. She was no longer fighting just for her military honor. She had to fight for the man who saved her life, her comrade who had faced death with her, and the man who now held a deeper place in her heart. The storm had passed, but the real war was just beginning. The greatest complication. The days that followed crawled by. Ashley was discharged from the hospital but was essentially under house arrest in her barracks. All her communications were monitored, and contact with the outside world was completely cut off. I had disappeared as if I never existed. Instead of me, the visitors were sharp-eyed investigators dispatched from the Pentagon. They interrogated Ashley for several days. Interrogation was the precise word. They treated her not as a victim or a whistleblower, but as a potential co-conspirator. When did you first meet Jackson Carter? When did you learn his real identity? Were you romantically involved? Did he coerce or threaten you? The questions were intrusive and insulting. Their intention was clear, to frame the incident not as corruption by Colonel Morgan, but as a rogue action by a subordinate officer who colluded with an outside threat. Ashley responded to every question calmly and logically, staking her grandfather's honor and her own military pride on every word. But she could not shake the feeling of hitting an enormous, invisible wall. A whole month passed. Morgan, in custody, had hired the best defense team and was preparing for a lengthy legal battle, and the powerful forces in Washington were constantly trying to minimize and conceal the scandal. The Black Vulture file was almost certainly proven to be authentic through handwriting analysis and paper dating, but Morgan's team still tried to devalue it as unverified information that should have been discarded years ago. The biggest problem remained Jackson Carter. An unofficial request to the Japanese government confirmed that I was wanted for military espionage and treason. This became Morgan's most powerful weapon. The investigators tried to force Ashley to admit that she had colluded with a known traitor. The endless questioning and unseen pressure were slowly wearing her down. Then, one morning, she woke up in her barracks and collapsed with severe dizziness and nausea. She initially thought it was stress, but the symptoms persisted for several days. A terrifying possibility crossed her mind. Could it be? She managed to evade surveillance and request an unofficial medical checkup. A few days later, her trembling hands opened the envelope with the test results. Inside was just one sentence: pregnant. The world stopped. The father was obviously me. That brief moment we held each other, trying to soothe our fear and terror before heading to Silent Mountain, had created a new life. A crushing fear hit her before any joy could register. Her future in the military, her grandfather's honor, and this terrifying, ongoing battle. Could she possibly raise a child through all this? The father was a man branded a traitor by his own country, whose fate was completely unknown. If Morgan and his backing forces discovered this fact, the child would become their most vicious weapon of attack. She struggled sleeplessly for days. Should she abandon her military career and terminate the pregnancy? Or carry this burden and keep the child? Officer Ashley Calloway and the woman Ashley, the mother-to-be, fought a desperate internal war. The decision came at an unexpected, quiet moment. She stood by the window and gently looked down at her stomach. There was no bump yet, but the fact that the child, mine and hers, was alive inside her felt like a miracle. That tiny life was completely separate from the desperate reality she faced. It was just living, its heart beating strongly. In that moment, Ashley understood. This child was not her weakness. It was the most powerful reason she had to fight. She had to clear her grandfather's name, expose Morgan's crimes, and clear my name. After all this, she had to build a world where this child could live in honor. She wavered no more. Her eyes were now much harder, absolutely driven. The next morning, she contacted General MacArthur. "General," she said. "I need to meet Jackson Carter. There are things I must hear directly from him. And I need permission to retain a lawyer for his defense. This is my right and a critical step in finding the truth of this case. If you refuse, I will expose this entire oppressive investigation to the media." It was a threat and a declaration of war. She was no longer an officer following orders. She was a fierce mother ready to risk everything to protect her child and her man. Ashley's audacious move worked. General MacArthur agreed to her demands. He, too, was tired of the pressure from Morgan's handlers and needed a new way to break the stalemate. He secretly hoped that the wildcard named Ashley Calloway would shake the board up. The reunion, after 2 months, took place in a sterile meeting room deep within the base. Thick, bulletproof glass separated us, and we spoke through a cold intercom. I looked haggard, but my eyes were still fiercely alive. I sat up straight, as if the wound in my shoulder had healed completely. "Are you all right?" Ashley asked first, her voice shaking slightly. "I am fine," I replied simply, my gaze fixed on her face. I knew she had been through hell. "You do not look all right, though. I have something to tell you." Ashley took a deep breath and delivered the most important news. She did not care about eavesdroppers. In fact, she said it loud and clear so everyone could hear. "I am pregnant. It is your child." I felt the air rush out of my lungs through the glass. My eyes widened in shock. For a man who thought he had lost everything, my country, my honor, my family, the news of a new life, my own blood, was an impossible shock. Morgan's venomous taunt flashed through my mind. "Guess the special forces can make babies, too, huh?" That insult had come back as a miraculous reality. After a few seconds of silence, I asked, my voice trembling, "Is that true?" "Yes." A single, hot tear streamed down my face. These were not the tears I shed when I was dishonorably discharged or when I heard about my father's death. These tears were born of sacred awe and a profound sense of responsibility I had never felt before. I was no longer alone. I had a life to protect, a life that I had to bring into the light, no matter the cost. My gaze changed. The quiet, passive demeanor vanished, replaced by a fierce, intense resolve, like that of a protective predator. "I will get out of here. And I will set everything right." At that moment, the door to the meeting room opened, and General MacArthur walked in, his expression unusually grim. He looked at both of us and spoke in a low voice. "The situation is far more complicated. In following Morgan's trail, we uncovered a much larger organization than Black Vulture. They are not just siphoning off military supplies. They are a massive industrial espionage and arms-dealing cartel that has been selling military technology and intelligence from both the U.S. and Japan to third-party nations for decades. Morgan was just a pawn. The real body of the monster is hiding somewhere we cannot imagine. They are desperately trying to cover the truth. It goes all the way up to the highest levels in Washington and Tokyo. The official investigation will soon be shut down due to pressure. And Mr. Carter, you will likely be deported to Japan and handled. It was a hopeless situation. But MacArthur was not giving up. If the official path is blocked, we will fight through unofficial channels. They do not know how far our grandfathers got. They are desperately looking for one last piece, the one thing they fear the most. He placed a small USB flash drive on the table. It came from Morgan's secret safe. It is encrypted, so we cannot check the contents, but the file name is Prometheus list. It most likely contains the list of the cartel's central members or their most fatal transaction records. The problem is the encryption. No expert has been able to crack it. He looked at me. I hear your grandfather, Ivan Volkov, was more than just a gunsmith. He was one of the best cryptographers at the University of Moscow. This code is likely designed to be solved only by someone connected to him. All eyes were on me. I stared silently at the drive. Prometheus. My grandfather mentioned that word once. The titan who stole fire for humanity but was punished with eternal suffering. My grandfather used it to describe the unbearable weight of the truth. Ashley looked at me through the bulletproof glass. Our first chance began with an old rifle called the Tear of the Wind. Now, a new oath was placed before us. For the future of our unborn child, for the honor of our two families, and for the countless victims of that vast darkness, we had to steal the last fire, Prometheus. I nodded quietly. I reached my hand toward the bulletproof glass. Ashley raised her hand, placing her palm against mine. The cold glass separated us, but our hearts and resolve were connected, burning hotter than ever. The curtain was rising on a new war. MacArthur's efforts resulted in Ashley and me being moved to a clean room deep beneath Fort Carson, completely shielded from electromagnetic interference. In that isolated white room, there was only a state-of-the-art supercomputer, analysis equipment, and the Prometheus list USB drive on the desk. This was now our final battlefield to strike at the heart of a massive conspiracy. There is no time, MacArthur said gravely before leaving the room. The cartel knows its safe was breached. They are probably searching frantically for this drive right now. If they get one step ahead of us, we will all disappear without a trace. The heavy steel door closed, leaving only the low hum of the computer fans. I plugged the USB drive in. The monitor flooded with a torrent of meaningless symbols and encrypted text. It was a near-perfect encryption system. Even with every known decryption algorithm, it would take hundreds of years to crack. This is not a conventional cipher, I finally said, after staring at the screen for hours. My eyes were bloodshot, but they were clearer and deeper than ever. This is not something you solve with mathematical calculation. It is a problem you solve with instinct. I recalled my grandfather's teaching, Kenji, every lock holds the soul of the craftsman who built it. The key is only a way to talk to that soul. If the key is gone, you must listen to what the lock itself is saying. My grandfather always said that every creation bears the signature of its maker. A unique, single trace that can never be replicated, like a fingerprint. The key to this cipher cannot be a word or a number. It must be my grandfather's signature, the only one in the world. Signature? Ashley asked. What is it? Instead of answering, I looked at the only other object in the room that MacArthur had allowed to be brought in, the Tear of the Wind. The black beast was radiating a cold light. That is it, I said. Ashley shuddered. The gun where it all began was to be the final key to end it all. I took the Tear of the Wind and held it over a high-precision laser scanner. I scanned not any ordinary part of the rifle, but the Damascus steel barrel, created through hundreds of foldings and hammerings. The screen displayed the microscopic, invisible steel wave pattern as a three-dimensional digital image. It looked like chaos, but hidden within it was a perfect, secret order known only to the Creator. It was a unique pattern, impossible to fake, created by the fire, the steel, and the soul of the craftsman. That was my grandfather's signature. I converted the scan pattern into a cipher key root. My fingers danced across the keyboard. The moment I hit the final enter key, a chill ran down my spine. The chaotic cipher text that filled the monitor instantly vanished. In its place, the Prometheus list was revealed, as if a Pandora's box had been opened. It was more than a list of names. It was a chronology of evil. Records of every crime the cartel committed over the last 40 years. Names of former high-ranking generals, congressmen, and defense industry executives from the U.S. and Japan, along with astronomical wire transfers, lists of illegally traded cutting-edge weapons technology, and even the secret Swiss bank account numbers they used to launder their dark money. It was a terrifying truth that could shake the very foundations of two nations. "Oh, my God," Ashley muttered, staring at the screen. Black Vulture was only a tiny tip of this colossal iceberg. The darkness our grandfathers fought against was unimaginable. "We cannot just expose this," I said firmly. "They will control the media, fabricate evidence, and try to assassinate us. To kill this monster, we have to strike its heart with a single, decisive blow." We called General MacArthur back into the clean room. His face hardened with fury and resolve as he confirmed the list's contents. He immediately made contact with the few people he trusted inside the Pentagon, a special financial crimes investigation team from the Department of the Treasury and the Cyber Command directly under the Joint Chiefs of Staff. The counterattack against the giant cartel began with a small few. Their plan was bold and simple: do not hit the people, hit the money, and decapitate all the leaders simultaneously. Over several days, they located every central figure on the Prometheus list and secretly prepared for international cooperation to freeze the Swiss bank accounts. On the day of the reckoning, in a secret bunker in Washington, D.C., a massive display board showed a world map with dozens of red dots blinking, the locations of the cartel's central figures. Ashley, me, and Major General MacArthur watched the countdown with bated breath. "Operation start," MacArthur commanded. Everything happened at once. At the exact moment the Swiss accounts were frozen, arrest teams waiting around the world, in Washington, Tokyo, and beyond, simultaneously raided their locations. Generals enjoying parties in luxurious mansions, politicians giving speeches in Congress, arms dealers holding secret meetings on private yachts. They were all slapped with cold handcuffs before they could even grasp what was happening. There was no resistance. Their power was derived from money and influence, and all of it had evaporated in an instant. The red dots on the display board turned green, one by one. The colossal organization that had corrupted the world for decades was finally collapsing. The wind no longer weeps. 1 year later, we were on a peaceful ranch in the vast plains of Colorado, with the perpetual snows of the Rocky Mountains visible in the distance. Ashley was sitting in a rocking chair, nursing our newborn son. The boy had his father's black hair and his mother's blue eyes. His name was Miles Robert Carter, honoring both of our grandfathers. Since the Prometheus incident, the world had been turned upside down. Countless powerful figures fell, and both the U.S. and Japanese governments were rocked by unprecedented defense corruption scandals. Not all the truth was made public for reasons of national security, of course. But justice had been served in the shadows. Morgan was sentenced to life imprisonment. My father's name, and my own, were completely cleared with an official apology from the Japanese government. My service as a soldier was honorably reinstated. Ashley and I were hailed as heroes, but we both quietly chose to retire. We did not want to remain in a world tainted by blood and lies. With the help of General MacArthur, we were given new identities, leaving our past behind to build a new family here. I walked toward her, carrying a watering can, having just tended to the red maple sapling I had recently planted. In my other hand, I carried the tear of the wind. The perfectly restored rifle was no longer a murder weapon. It looked like a gift that had linked our two destinies. "I said I would marry you if you fixed that gun," Ashley smiled, holding the baby closer. "You fixed the gun, you fixed my life, and you set the history of both our families straight. That promise is still good." I knelt beside her without a word. I set the rifle down, pulled a small ring from my pocket, and slipped it onto her finger. It had no flashy gemstones. It was a unique ring I had carved and polished myself. Our wedding took place the following week right there on the farm. General MacArthur, now retired, served as the officiant. Our only other guest was our son, Miles, in his mother's arms. After the ceremony, we dug a deep hole beneath the young maple sapling. And in it, we carefully laid the tear of the wind to rest, the gun that carried the blood and tears of many, the glory and the fall of 2 families, and all of our love. We covered it with soil and tamped the ground firm. The gun was no longer visible. Now, only the young tree of new life would grow there, alongside our son. It is ironic, isn't it? Ashley leaned her head on my shoulder. The weapon of death that could have caused countless deaths ended up giving us a family. I held her close and gazed at the red sunset over the Rocky Mountains. The wind no longer weeps, I whispered. This will be the place where the wind is born. On the vast, quiet plain, the 3 of us stood close together. All the wounds and battles of the past had set with the sun. Only a peaceful tomorrow, beginning with the laughter of our newborn child, awaited us. The wind no longer cried, it just gently swept past our homestead.